Unfortunately, when armies strike, when armies attack, when armies, there's a madness. Yeah, there's a madness involved in warfare. There is a level of insanity involved in warfare. Okay, so the critical thinking or the morality suspended, especially if you can imagine an individual. It's not just, I'm just giving an example. One individual may not shoplift. You may have, okay, you have, alhamdulillah, you've been raised well. You have morals and etiquette, and you fear the law, or you fear Allah, or at least you're cognizant of the law of the land. So you as an individual on a normal day will never go to the shop and steal. But imagine suddenly there was a riot and you see everyone is running for the shops and taking. What happens to the individual at that moment? They're more susceptible. Yeah, they're more susceptible to doing the same thing because everyone's doing it. You know it's haram to steal. You know it goes against the law of the land. You know it's immoral. You know you're not raised to be a thief. But if you see the entire crowd running in and taking things, there's a greater likelihood that you could also participate. Yeah? So you find those people who are looting, technically they are thieves, but also technically they're not thieves because typically they would not have done that on a normal day. But because of the environment and the situation, they indulge. So likewise, if you're in a situation where you are first of all a soldier, you are used to seeing dead bodies. You're used to seeing people getting killed. Muslim, not Muslim, doesn't make a difference. You've seen dead bodies before. You've seen Muslims get killed. So that's the first thing. You lose the sensitivity. You have seen Muslims die before, so it's not a problem. Secondly, you are under a leadership, a government with a khilafah that tells you it's okay. We're giving you the green light. You will not be punished. You will not be wrong. We are giving you the green light. Thirdly, you've campaigned for months, maybe years. You're away from your family. You enter a city. There are women. Let's be honest and direct. Soldiers do these things to this very day. So when you combine all of these factors, it will take an exceptionally moral person in that situation not to indulge and to participate. And this is how they justify it to themselves that way. The army that fought against us is a transgressing army, therefore their women are halal for us, their wealth is halal for us, their blood is halal for us. Yeah, this is what happens, unfortunately. So they kill, and they will justify it later on. Yeah. In historical perspective, their story begins, as I said in the last shadow history, the story begins after that phase. So once they've done everything they've had to do and they've taken everything out, when they begin to build a new society, that's where their story begins. We forget about what came before that. They don't tell us about what came before that. We begin here. As you're seeing in 2024, December 2024, America is beginning a new chapter in Syria. They want to forget about what came before. They want to erase and scrub that history. They want to declassify and delist and begin a new chapter, a clean chapter, because what came before is not relevant anymore. We don't care about that. Let's start a new chapter. Okay? So that's how it works in warfare. That's how it works. That's how societies work. That's how the governments work. That's how armies work. It's part of it's like an occupational hazard. It comes with the job, unfortunately. Yeah? So that's why, again, we want to ward off as much as possible warfare and civil wars, because when it erupts, there are no rules, no respect for human life, for sanctity, for whether she's a sister in Islam or not. There's no respect. Anything goes. Anything goes. Exactly, there we are. Well, if they killed Al-Hussein and took his women and children as captives, and in some accounts they dragged them, they paraded them half naked, I don't think they're going to care about the average Muslim beyond that. Yeah. The rules of war are very different. They don't look at it from that's why I said when you look at the seerah and the injunctions of the Khulafa Rashidun as well, don't cut a tree, don't kill people who are not fighting, don't kill the elderly, don't break down churches. These are the exceptions to the very, very vast rule. They are exceptions. Yeah. It's not the rule, it's an exception. You will see, for example, during in the 1990s, in the 80s, 90s, suicide bombing became somehow halal. Right? We know suicide is haram in Islam. How do we get to a point where certain military factions and supporters considered it halal? How does it become halal when we know suicide is haram? Because when you're in that environment and certain struggles, there are certain accommodations made. Okay, typically it's not allowed, but in this situation, because of this, so things change. The parameters change in times of war. Yeah, Allah will judge these people, and each individual will be judged according to their intention. But this is why warfare itself is something we don't want. We don't aspire for warfare, because when it breaks out, there are no rules. Yeah, the soldier is not going to say to you, "MashaAllah, my Muslim sister, my Muslim brother, my elder." No. Abu Sa'id al-Khudri, radiallahu anhu, when they came to Medina in the Battle of Harra, he was an elderly man. He was the man who would ask the questions that nobody else would ask. Yeah, he would ask Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam questions nobody would ask him. So they caught him. He was an elderly man at this point. He went to a cave to seek refuge, and the soldiers found him there, and they were about to behead him until they found out he was Abu Sa'id al-Khudri. Yeah, there was no respect for the elderly, for the mashayikh. No respect. No respect. Yeah? That's just the way things are in times of war. Complete madness. So we want to avoid that as much as possible. Right, so let me just undo this. We are going to look at the principle of revolutions. Do we have any revolutionaries in the group? Please raise your hands. Does anybody here think revolution is the way forward? You know my position already. I'm not shy in telling you my position. Do we have anyone here who is a revolutionary? Somebody who thinks we need to make revolutions right now in the Muslim world? Raise your hands. Don't be shy. I'm not going to pick on you. I just want to hear. Who thinks revolutions are the way forward? We need revolutions. We need to revolve. We need to remove these illegitimate and kuffar governments and replace them with proper, like al-Sheikh, like al-Muhammad, as the Abbasids promised, al-Murad. Who thinks we need one of those in the Muslim world? We have a 2-minute discussion. Don't be shy. Just raise your hand if you think revolution, after everything we've learned in the shadow history and now in the Umayyad kingdom, because it worked for the Abbasids, by the way, it worked. Their revolution was successful. The Abbasids were successful. So it's not a failure. They succeeded tremendously well. They planned it out well. They had the right people on board. They had the right strategy, and they executed. So they did really well. They did not fail. They succeeded. Who thinks this is something that we should aspire to? Maybe it's an option we have when it comes to reforming the Muslim world today. Okay, we don't have any revolutionaries here today, so we'll move on. In the Western world, that's not revolution. That would be warfare. Revolution is in your own house. When you do it in your own house, it's called revolution. When you do it in somebody else's house, it's called a war, total war. So, okay, so let's move on to the issue of the ethics of war. As I've mentioned before, when war breaks out, there are no rules anymore, unfortunately. Although we have ideals, we have standards, Islamically speaking, you shouldn't do this, you shouldn't do that, but in reality, people, barakallahu feekum, people don't abide by these rules. Yeah? So Aristotle said, it is not always the same thing to be a good man and a good citizen. To be a good man and a good citizen are not the same thing. In other words, ethics and law are not always, they're not always synchronistic. To be a good ethical human being and to be a law-abiding human being are not always the same thing. Sometimes you have to break the law to be a good human being. Sometimes to be a good human being, you have to break the law. So, in the same vein, to be a good general, a good commander, a good soldier, a good warrior, doesn't always mean to be a good human being. To be a good human being is to be nice, considerate, kind, respectful, honest, gentle, reverential, merciful. But if you want to apply those principles to being a warrior, a commander, a general, it will never gel. We have fatwa, for example, in classical Islamic jurisprudence, where the scholars debate if a Muslim army is besieging a city or a village or a town, and they know for a fact there are Muslims in that city, in that village, in that town, But there are also enemies, or maybe kafir, kafir army, a kafir population, or maybe an enemy combatant unit in that city. Do they bomb the city or not? Can they throw what is called Greek fire, which was the pre-modern form of bombing? Can the Muslim army bomb that city, knowing that there are Muslims in that city? And the answer is, does anyone have, let's imagine how the city is 50-50, 50% Muslim, 50%, I don't know, Jewish. And there is an army coming to confront the Jewish army in that city, and they besiege the city. The commander realizes this city is 50% Muslim, 50% Jewish, and we're fighting the Jewish army, the IDF, for example. Is it allowed for the Muslim army to bomb that city indiscriminately, or do they have to preserve the life of the Muslims in that city? What do you think? Okay, so you're going with they have to bomb. Anyone else? Yeah, it will be allowed. Yeah. So the Muslim general, or the Muslim commander, or the Muslim army would be permitted to bomb that city, that town, that village, knowing that there are Muslims there. And they will be raised upon their iman and upon their intention. But we will not stop the operation because there are Muslims there. So already you can see that the parameters change very, very quickly. We will not stop the operation because there are Muslims there. We will still bomb, and Allah will judge them. So it becomes very different. The ethics of war, completely different. Completely different. Whereas the opposite would be, if one individual went to another individual's house, and you know that in that person's house, who you're going to fight or going to confront, there is a Muslim woman or a Muslim child in the house, a resident of that house, and you want to shoot, I don't know, for whatever reason, you want to shoot the house, whatever, or burn the house, you cannot burn the house while these people are in there, the innocents. You can't do that. Yeah, that's called murder. It's haram to do that. Your problem is with that one person, not the entire family, let alone a Muslim in that family. You can't do that. But if it was a war situation, you would be allowed to do that. Yeah. And you don't have to even try to rescue. You could try to rescue them, but if you didn't rescue them, you would not be at fault. So it takes on a different dimension. It's very different when it comes to the issue of warfare and revolutions. And this is why you find in Muslim majority countries, when you do have revolution and a war, you would ask yourself, how is it possible? For example, Sudan right now, it's almost 100% Muslim. How are these soldiers raping Muslim women who are completely covered? How are they killing Muslim children and Muslim men? How is it possible? Elderly men who can be their fathers and mothers and grandparents. How are they? Because in that scenario, none of that matters. The rules are suspended. They don't see any of that. Yeah? It's complete chaos. Complete chaos. That's why, again, we don't pray for revolutions and warfare. Because by the time it gets to that point, you cannot count upon any of the normal standards and rules to apply anymore. What you would typically expect normally would no longer be acceptable, and anything goes. Yeah? No. Allah huwa al-Latif. Allah is subtle. Al-Khabir. Allah knows everything. Allah is also the one who takes you to account for every single action. Of course, Allah will take you to account for it. But what it means is the earthly authority, the Khalifa, the government, will not take you to account for it. Yeah? But Allah will definitely take you to account for it. Al-Muhasib, He accounts people for things. Every single thing will be accounted for. So absolutely. Yeah? But unfortunately, power is an intoxicant. When people become powerful, they become leaders, governors, or they become generals, they don't care about the akhirah, for the majority of them. Yeah, they are so kind of overwhelmed with the allure of power, they forget all of that. Yeah. So they don't consider any of that. But of course, they will be accountable in Yawm al-Qiyamah for sure. For sure. Yeah. for sure. So power is a dirty thing. It's not something that we all want to be. We don't want positions of power. Okay, power comes with a lot of really negative side effects. But also, when you're not in power, do not antagonize power. Yeah? If you're not in power, do not antagonize. Don't get in the way of power. Don't get in the way of power. Yeah? Because if you do that, you will feel the consequences. Yeah? That's why we are told as Muslims, do not go out of your way to confront governments and rulers, especially when it's your own governments and rulers. Because if they reciprocate, it's hell on earth. And we have seen many examples of that, unfortunately. It's hell on earth. So this is known as realpolitik. Realpolitik is effectively, we've covered it before, I'm going to repeat it again here. It is where the politicians or the politics or the political strategy does not care about, the sentimental, the ethical. It's about objectives only. It's objective driven. So long as we achieve the objectives, that is what we're going to do, irregardless of the consequences. So for example, in the 90s, when the Americans, following the Iraq-Iran war and then following the invasion of Kuwait, Operation Desert Shield and Desert Storm, when America completely crushed Iraq, Saddam had to send 2 requests for them to stop. Please stop. And Bush said no. Right? Please stop. He was calling Bush, and Bush would not respond. So he sent messages to Gorbachev, the Soviet leader, and he would send, and he still didn't stop. So he punished. So after all of that, the Americans insisted they're going to put sanctions on Iraq. It wasn't enough to bomb them into the Stone Age. They had to put sanctions on Iraq. So 500,000 Iraqi children were killed as a result of the sanctions. And their factories, their medicine factories, their baby milk factories were all bombed. They destroyed everything. So these people were no longer able to defend themselves or to heal their wounded and their sick. Right? Despite all of that, Madeleine Albright, one of the representatives of the American government, was questioned later on. We know that we have killed 500,000 Iraqi children as a result of this tremendous and horrific sanction. Do you think it was worth it? And you have it on camera. She says, well, it was worth it. Yeah, this is realpolitik. To get what we want, that was a worthwhile consequence for what we wanted, which was to crush Saddam and to crush his regime. It was worth 500,000 children dying of malnutrition and starvation. That is realpolitik. That is realpolitik. And most governments on earth operate at that level. They are not thinking about the 1 or 2 children who died because of a bomb that went overhead. They could care less, quite frankly. Yeah, they could care less. So this is again why, when you understand the power dynamics, revolutions don't look as nice. They're not as enticing as they appear to be, as romantic as they appear to be. However, politics has to be looked at from a specific perspective, a specific angle. Okay? Don't look at it from the angle of the civilian, the individual person, because if you look at it that way, it will look very ugly. But we all need armies. We all need soldiers. We all need generals. We all need artillery to be safe in our societies. We need these things. But you have to look at it the way you look at a butterfly. From a distance, the butterfly is, mashallah, beautiful. What a wonderful creation of Allah. How beautiful this creation. But what you don't realize is that before it was beautiful, it was quite unsightly. It was quite disgusting. It went through a process of refinement, metamorphosis. It did not begin this way. It went through a process of transformations. Okay? At a certain point in that process, you would not have even wanted to touch the thing or to see it. It would look disgusting, repulsive. But that's a process that you didn't see. You only got to see the end product, a wonderful butterfly, okay, in the garden. In the same way, governments and dynasties and establishments are the butterflies you look at today and you think, mashallah. But you didn't see how they began. You didn't see where they started off. The guerrilla warfare, the fighting, the killing, the bombing, right? The maiming, the raping, the pillaging, the bloodletting. You didn't see any of that. You only saw the end result of what is today in America, for example. But if you went back to the American War, the War of Independence, look at the details there. So you have to realize that when you look at politicians and politics, you have to look at it from the holistic perspective, okay? To realize that what may be a terrorist group today may be a butterfly tomorrow. What is a butterfly today may have been a terrorist group yesterday. Yeah. Look at it from the entire perspective. Yeah? Don't just focus on one aspect and assume that it was always this way, or it will always be this way. An example, again, to make it very relevant to today, is the example of Al-Amir Abu Muhammad al-Jawlani. And the reason why I call him that, the reason why I call him that is because although last week or last month he was a terrorist, today he is the leader of a nation. And according to Islamic principle, if we were in Damascus or Syria today, we would have to give him bay'ah, because he is now the Emir of that region. Yeah. In the same way America wants to give him bay'ah. If you look at, for example, Biden and his emissaries, representative, they want to engage with him. They understand that yesterday's terrorist is today's leader. We have to get in bed with him. Okay? We forget everything that came before that. The metamorphosis stage is over now. He's a butterfly. Yeah? This is over. He's a butterfly now. They understand that. They won't account him in the same way they would account him if he wasn't a leader. It's moved on to a certain stage now. He's a butterfly. They see it that way. Islam also, the Islamic political system, works in the same way. It works in the same way. And I'll show you some examples later on. There's a principle that the jurists and scholars apply in these situations. It doesn't matter how you got into power, so long as you remain in power. I mentioned it in the last seminar. I'm going to give you further detail today. Yeah? So that's the lens through which you should look at things. Now, there are many examples in recent history of this metamorphosis stage happening in what became governments in the Muslim world. I'm going to give you a few more examples here. Here we have in the 1970s, the PLO. Yasser Arafat and his Fedayeen were infamous, as we have studied in shadow history, when they went, for example, to Jordan, and you had Black September. They were terrorists. They literally were terrorists. Kidnapping, bombing, assassinations, coup d'etat, all types. They did everything. Guerrilla warfare. And then later on, he became a government, the PA. They put the guns down and began to sign treaties and began to attend conventions and began to get closer to other, especially Israel. So they went from being a terrorist group to receiving Nobel Prizes, to receiving awards, to being on the Times Man of the Year. So he became a butterfly at that point. And they were willing to forget everything that came before that and to focus on what he became today. That's politics. Now, in civilian life, in an ordinary civilian environment, a man who has killed 10 people or one relative of yours will never become your friend. You can never reconcile that. Yeah? You never, but at the level of politics and governments, that happens all the time. Enemies become friends and friends become enemies. It goes back and forth. They can forgive and forget, or they can forget and move on to something new. So we saw that in Palestine, for example. We also saw that in Chechnya. Does anyone know who this man is here? So in the first Chechen, there were two wars. The first war, his father was one of the leading figures, right? And they hated Russia. But by the second war, his son, he turned the corner and he received the Star of Russia award, one of the highest possible stars you can receive, the highest possible awards. And since then, he's been like this with Putin. And he turned against the Mujahideen who came to help, and those who were fighting with his father, he turned against them and would hunt them down and kill them. Yeah? That can happen just like that. You can go from one side to the other side. Yeah, it's all political alliances. He is now a top ally of the Russian government. But consequently, when he became powerful and he became a president, I think in his 30s, one of the youngest presidents at the time, 2006, he was 30, 35, the youngest in the world at the time. But Dagestan is peaceful now, isn't it? Chechnya, Dagestan is peaceful now. So despite the fact that he went the other way, he achieved peace for his country. Now say what you like about the man, he achieved peace and stability for his country. Whereas prior to that, it was warfare. It was mujahideen warfare. But when he became powerful, he took the Russian hand. He brought peace to his nation. Yeah. That's politics. We have Ahmed Shah Massoud and the French finance minister. Again, foes become friends. And Ahmed Shah Massoud was also actually, before 9/11, he was alerting the American governments. He wanted them to support him financially and materially to actually attack or to counter the attacks of Al-Qaeda and other groups. That's why he was taken out on the eve of 9/11. This is politics. Whereas before that, they were against the West, but now they're actually allying with the West. Another example, Sadat. We know that story, right? We know that story after 73. From being bitter enemies to again getting joint Nobel Prizes. And Jimmy Carter here. So this is politics, people. Today they're friends, tomorrow they're enemies, tomorrow they're friends. It's never, never, never clear. Now, in terms of the elder generation, we have 𝗃𝙗𝗓 al-Jazairi. 𝗃𝙗𝗓 al-Jazairi, if you look at his medals, he is a tremendous figure in history, both in the East and the West, no questioning about that. But, however, he did receive French awards from the French establishment. He was even a Freemason at some point. Yeah, this is after the jihad, when they took him to France and they took him in, and then he went to Syria, where he settled in Syria. But he was a Freemason at some point. Yeah, he received the the French Legion of Arms, like the highest awards. He also received the Ottoman awards as well for his service. Yeah. And finally, we have Imam Shamil of Dagestan. Imam Shamil of Dagestan is a hero to most Muslims outside of Dagestan. But those inside, some of them consider him a traitor. Why would that be? Does anyone know why? Those inside consider him a traitor. Why? Not all, but there are some inside consider him a traitor today. Does anyone have an idea why? So basically, his son was captured. It's a long story. But effectively, he put his guns down, he put his swords down, and he accepted Russian terms of peace. Okay? And after that, there was peace between the Russians for a while. And then he was basically under house arrest. So because he surrendered his arms, there was still Hajj Murad, for example, Haji Murad, there was still Mujahideen who didn't give up. So they considered him a traitor. In the same way, if you go to Algeria, some will consider 𝗃𝙗𝗓 a traitor. Yeah, because the political direction later on changed. Yeah, this is just how things are. It's not black and white. So when we look at the leaders, people in position of power, when they were struggling against power, it's one thing. What they said, how they did things, their policies. When they get to a position of a level of power, a level of prominence, things change. The parameters change, the priorities change. And we will not understand until we're in that position. So again, our scholars tell us then, do not be quick to judge and to condemn them, because you don't know what they're going through. It's very easy for you on the sideline to criticize and to point fingers, but if you're not in that position, you may not understand the full weight of responsibility. So this is one of the reasons why, again, Sunni Islam does not encourage us to take that path. Many examples. There are many other examples, by the way. These are just very simple examples I've put together. Yeah, it's politics. It's just, at the end of the day, it's politics. Yeah. It's politics. It's no hard feelings, it's just politics. So now the other thing is, even though the butterfly is fully formed, right? So you know that it had a past. Okay, in the past we did these bad things to people. We enslaved people from Africa. We took them as laborers for 400 years. We exploited them. But guess what? America's great today. Forget all of that, because we're now a butterfly. We're at the butterfly phase. Forget the past. Okay. But the system as it is today, if you look close enough, you will still see imperfections and ugly features. If you look close enough, if you zoom in, you will find that it's not as beautiful as it looks like. It's only beautiful from a distance. From a distance, it's beautiful. But if you get close enough and look at the policies, the actions, the records, the policies, you will see that it is still barbaric and ugly. That's why it's better to look at it from a very far distance. Yeah, you don't look close, because if you get too close, you can still see the old monster. So what politics requires from us is process and perspective. When you judge a political entity or a leader, you have to look at the process. Where did they begin? Where are they now? Where could they be heading tomorrow? Don't judge based on where they are today only, or where they were yesterday. Look at the whole process. The second thing is perspective. Are you looking too close? Are you zooming in too close? Or are you looking at just the wider picture? So for example, again, let's take an example where we are today. Somebody may say, well, Jolani, again, it's a good point. We're taking case studies here. Yeah? He was only last week or last month, he had 10 million on his head, and he was proper mujahid. Yeah? There are people right now saying he's already betrayed the cause because he hasn't attacked Syria, he hasn't attacked Israel yet. He's already betrayed the cause. He's not a proper mujahid. Yeah? Well, that's very easy for you to say because you're not in the position where you have to make decisions now. You can talk about uncompromising positions all day long. You don't have to make the decision, right? Where he was last month and where he is today, completely different. Things have shifted now. So you need to shift your perspective as well. Okay? And look at the process where things began and where they are today. If you don't do that, you will end up making takfir of every government in the Muslim world. If you don't do that, you will end up making takfir. Furthermore, I could, but I will not do it. There are many very revered heroes of Islam on the military and political side of things. If you were to look at their policies, you would have a different perspective on who they were as individuals. Maybe I'll give one example. Sultan Abdul Hamid II. Yeah, it's a recent example. I can give that example. I could go further, but I won't. Sultan Abdul Hamid II. Certain policies of his were not very good on a humanitarian level. For those of you who know the history will know what I'm intimating towards. They called him the Red Sultan for a reason. So if you look too close, you will have no heroes left. But if you look from the very broad perspective always, everything looks nice and beautiful. You need perspective and process to make sense of things. Yeah? It's politics. Now, when it comes to the issue of revolutions, liberation, it's very different. There's an old Latin phrase which was coined by Flavius Vegetus in the 3rd century. He who wants peace must prepare for war. He who wants peace must prepare for war. Yeah? Revolutions are never peaceful. If you want peace and rest and to enjoy the fruits of a revolution, be prepared to die. There is no such thing as a peaceful revolution. This is such a universal standard that in government buildings they have the motto there. If you want peace, there's no peace without war. No one can give a country peace without blood being shed. You don't just ask for peace, please be nice to us. It doesn't work that way. No nation on earth will grant peace without first severe cost of lives. No nation, no sovereign nation will grant you peace without fighting and killing and spilling blood. So if you desire peace and independence and sovereignty, you need to be prepared to fight. Banu Israel were promised a land. Allah promised them a land. Did Allah give them the land openly? No, He said to them, go and fight. And when they refused to fight, Allah said, in that case, stay in the desert for 40 years until that generation dies off and a new generation comes who will fight for that land. But you will not enter the land without fighting. This is a law that is as old as time. You will not get peace and independence without fighting. The ancient Greeks and Romans knew it. The modern world understands it. And it's just part of politics. Nothing comes for free. You cannot protest your way into sovereignty. You can't petition your way into peace. There's only one language that people understand, and that is prepare for war. Yeah, it's just the way it is. Malcolm said it best. There is no such thing as a non-violent revolution. In his famous message to the grassroots in 1963, he's speaking to youngsters, university students. He's telling them, with all the idealistic principles in your mind of equality and fairness and justice, one thing needs to be very clear to your mind. There is no such thing as a non-violent revolution. Revolution is violence by nature. Jefferson wrote to William Smith in 1787, the tree of liberty must be refreshed from time to time with the blood of patriots and tyrants. It is its natural manure. In other words, in order to be free, you must spill blood on both sides. It is the nature of things that liberation requires blood. So revolution is not going to be a matter of let's just go out and let's have a protest, let's sign petitions. When you call for revolution, you're calling for blood. And this is something that is universally attested to. Not just the Americans, but if you go to Russia, Lenin says, we no longer have a Tsar. Nicholas II was killed in a revolution. Today, a river of blood divides him from the Russian people. In other words, for us to be free from him, we have to spill a river of blood. It's time for Russian workers to begin the struggle. Yeah. So again, this is what revolution requires. Don't think you can pick up your phone and tweet until revolution is successful. Twitter fingers. No, revolution is not on Twitter. Revolution is you say goodbye to your wife, goodbye to your children, goodbye to your mother, and you go out there and you are willing to spill blood and to have your blood spilled. That's revolution. The American Revolution wasn't on Twitter. It wasn't a protest. It wasn't a petition. They literally had to die to attain freedom. The Russian Revolution wasn't on Twitter, wasn't on X, wasn't in the streets with placards. They literally had to spill blood. As it says, a river of blood. A river of blood between us and the old system. Yeah? This is what revolution means. Which is why when our scholars tell us, be slow to make khuruj, we should listen. We should listen. Because the consequences of a botched revolution, and we have seen in many nations in the Muslim world, I will show examples later on, we are still feeling that today. It's not a light thing to take on board. Revolution, revolution, revolution. It's not as easy as we make it seem. It requires a lot of blood. Haiti. Here you have Toussaint Louverture, the famous revolutionary in Haiti, which became the first black republic in the entire world. They stood up in revolution. Enough is enough. Okay? But if you look at the history of the Haitian revolution, it was nothing but blood. Gorish. That's what it required. Every white person had to be killed, hacked. Right? That's what it required to become independent. They couldn't speak their way out of it. They couldn't negotiate their way out of it. They couldn't petition. They had to pick up guns and knives and hack people to death. Yeah? That's what it took in Haiti as well. If you go to China, Mao Zedong, we the Chinese nation have the spirit to fight the enemy to the last drop of our blood. not to petition them, not to go to the UN, not to demonstrate against them. We are willing to spill every single drop of blood left in the nation to be independent. Now, all of these people are revolutionaries, and every one of their revolutions has changed the world. Here's the irony: the nations today who stand as the guarantors of peace and the brokers of peace, how did they get there to begin with? Through these revolutions. America had to go through a bloody revolution. Russia had to go through a bloody revolution. Haiti had to go through a bloody revolution. China had to go through a bloody revolution. None of them attained peace and sovereignty and power through petitions and Twitter and dialogue. Yeah? Peace is never given that way. Malcolm used to say it all the time. None of these people who you are asking for peace and reparations and some kind of justice, they never attained it in those ways. There was only one way they attained it: revolution. But that requires a lot of sacrifice. Yeah? So what are the rules of revolution? What are the rules of revolution? Yeah? If we wanted a revolution today in 2024, what are the rules of revolution? Does anyone have an idea? What could be the rules, the golden rules of a revolution? Let's decide in this room right now. We want to start a revolution. What are the rules, the general rules we should be aware of? Wonderful. Wonderful. I like that. Thank you very much. That was his statement. Die so others could live. Willing to die. That's the first step. You're not going to live. You're not going to survive the revolution. You have to sacrifice. So these are all good considerations, but revolution has very simple rules. Yeah, very simple rules from now until the end of time. That's also a good support, good alliance, but more elementary rules, more basic rules are as follows. Yeah, no. Good, very good, very good. So the first rule is: do not remove what you cannot replace. If you can't fix the car, don't lift the bonnet. Don't pull the wires if you don't know how to fix that cabinet or whatever it is, electronic device. Do not remove what you cannot replace. How many people have tried, how many civilizations, how many nations have tried to have a revolution? And once they've removed that thing that was an obstacle, they had no plan, they had no objective, they had nothing to replace it. And so the society falls into complete chaos. The Abbasids already had a system in mind, already had candidates in mind, already had a plan and a program in mind, which is why when they came into power, once they removed what was there, they can replace it immediately. Do not remove what you cannot replace. Terrible. We need to get rid of the leader. What will you replace him with? Sufyan al-Thawri said it best. Let's go and revolt against Hajjaj. And then what? What is after Hajjaj? Do not remove what you cannot replace. Level 1 of revolutionary insight. Do not remove what you cannot replace. Unless you have a system that you know will take over once you succeed in your revolution, don't talk to me about revolution. Do not tell me about revolution. First, tell me how you're going to replace what's already there as a system, and then we can talk revolution. Yeah. Lenin had a program before, Marxism. Right? It was already written. They already knew what they will do with society once they succeed. But just let's revolt. This is an open door to anarchy. So rule number 1, never remove what you cannot replace. Ever. Number 2, as our brother said, don't start a fight you can't finish. Don't start a revolution you cannot win. Don't start a fight you can't finish. Don't remove what you can't replace. Don't start what you can't finish. And the third rule, don't break rules 1 and rule 2. It's that simple. If revolution means we just want to replace the system, we just want to get rid of the person in power, but you have no plan as to what comes after that, This is chaos in the making. As they say, the devil you know better than the devil you don't know, right? Better the devil you know than the one you don't know. The second thing is, don't start a revolution that you can't win. Because if you do that, the entire society will suffer. You can't finish, you can't win it. You started something that will not be finished easily. And you've triggered a war that you cannot contain or defend people from. So don't start it if you can't finish it. You need to be sure that once we launch the program, we can actually raise armies. We have a way of finishing the job and crushing the opposition. We can finish the job, but never start something you can't finish. This is why popular revolts are a terrible idea. A terrible idea. Anytime you see it's a terrible idea because they break rules 1 and rule 2 at the same time. You have 1 million people revolting against the government. What do you replace the government with? Number 1. What will you replace the government with? Number 1. Number 2, are you able to do this if it takes you another 10 years of the same level of sacrifice and all your family dies and you lose everything? Are you willing to sacrifice all of that to succeed? If the answer is no to one or both of these, don't start where you can't finish. The revolution will definitely be a nightmare. Yeah? And we've seen that in many nations. However, not all revolutions are bad. Recent history has taught us not all revolutions are bad. Some revolutions actually work. So in the Muslim world, in the 20th century, these are some of the revolutions that have actually worked. Saudi Arabia was successful. Oman was successful. Bangladesh, hold on, was successful. And Iran was successful. Does anyone know how Sultan Qaboos came into power of Oman? Yes. Against? Okay, but why was the coup successful? Yes, Barakallahu Feekum. Barakallahu Feekum. He went to Britain and he got them to support him before he made the move. So he had a plan and a system and he had somebody to support him, a powerful ally. They backed him, so the coup was bloodless. It was successful. Why was Abdul Aziz's movement successful? Yes, 100%. Perfect. Barakallahu Feekum. In 29, the Battle of Sibila, he crushed his own army, the Ikhwan, who were the most loyal faction of his army, but they were over-ambitious. They began to say that he had lost effectively his way. He was supposed to expand and go beyond the borders of what is now Saudi Arabia and to spread a da'wah into Kuwait and other areas and to convert the Shia into Sunni Islam. He said no, that wasn't the plan. See, and it took a bit of time, but eventually he crushed them. And who was supporting him on that day? Who did he bring along with him that day? Because the battle lasted 1 hour, by the way, only 1 hour. Who did he have? The British, yeah. So his movement was successful because he knew when to crush. Even if it came to crushing his own people, he knew when to do it. He did it. Qaboos went against his own father. So there's a level of ruthlessness that you require to be successful, unfortunately. Mujibur Rahman, Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, how did his revolution work? Yes. Yes. So he went against a Muslim nation and support was sided by a common enemy. But it had to be done, right? Do you think that was a bad revolution? Did it fail, or do you think it was a good revolution, Bangladesh? Yeah. It was successful, yeah. And Iran, as we know, Iran, obviously, Khomeini came in 79, took power, removed the Pahlavi dynasty, and they're still in power to this very day. So these all worked. but it wasn't a walk in the park. It wasn't rosy. Who was supporting Khomeini? So let's take a break for a second here. British support, Indian support. Who was supporting Khomeini? The French, yes, indirectly, and the Americans. Yeah. So it wasn't just, and what is common amongst all these people is there were people already in an established situation. They either had support, a system, or they were already in the political arena. Yeah, it was very, very well prepared and poised. Finally, where revolutions go wrong, before we go off and pray and call it a day, inshallah. So these are the revolutions that went right, and the ones that went wrong. Turkey. Which revolution set everything off in Turkey, or Ottoman Turkey? Yes, Young Turk Revolution. And they completely destroyed everything, because as a result of that, we know World War I, we were sided with the wrong team. The Ottoman Empire just crumbled. Their intention was good, wasn't it? In 1909, 1908, 1909. The intention was good. Restore the constitution, limit the powers of the Sultan, but it went really, really bad. Then we have Iraq. Which revolution was that kicked everything off? The Great Iraqi Revolution in 1920 against the British. But in return for that, 1 year later in 21, they received Faisal as their king. So it backfired. Then we have the Syrian Revolution, the first revolution. Who led that revolution? Who led the first Syrian revolution? Hafiz al-Assad. Do you think that revolution went well? Yeah, I guess, okay, I can agree on that side. But I would say, my personal opinion is that people in Iran are not at the level of the people of Syria were, in terms of jailing, repression, and complete just barbarity. There were, Savak was there when the Shah was there. That was under his reign. Keep in mind also, the Shah was a worse dictator. So when they saw Khomeini, he was a relief for them compared to Savak and what they used to suffer at the time in the prisons. So the revolution there was welcome because what they had with the Shah was far greater repression. But it maintains, is still there in power, so they're successful in that sense. So the Syrian revolution was not a good revolution because the outcome was complete misery for the people. And we're only learning now publicly, the wider public, just how bad it was under that administration. The Somali revolution in the 1990s, the outcome of that, horrific, yeah, and it's still not been resolved. There are still after effects. The Egyptian revolution, that's a bit of a mixed bag because the Egyptians they attained a lot, they became very popular, they revived the Arab world for a while, but at the end of the day, we ended up with dictators, right? And a military dictatorship. Then we have Libya. You know, at the time, the chants on the street were Iblis wala Idris, Iblis wala Idris, Iblis, Shaitan, and not Idris. This was King Idris of Libya. They wanted to revolt and they wanted him out of office. So they would chant Idris wala Iblis. What did they get after Idris? They got Gaddafi. So that revolution, of course, I mean, he was revolutionary. He brought good to in terms of the economic position, but there was a reason why they wanted him out in the Arab Spring. There's a reason why they wanted him out and why they killed him the way they killed him. This is the Great Arab Revolt. I don't have to explain that. The Hashemite Revolt, okay? Went completely wrong. They were completely deceived. They didn't get what they asked for. And in fact, the Zionists got what they wanted. So it went wrong when they went against the Ottomans. And finally, the Democratic Republic of Afghanistan. These are the ones who launched a coup in 79, which triggered USSR to enter. And we know what happened after that in 79. And the society has been suffering since, up until recently. So these revolutions didn't really go well. It all went downhill. There we are. Okay. I should also mark a distinction before, I don't want people to misunderstand here. There's a difference between revolution and liberation. Yeah. Islamically speaking, liberation is fard ayn. If a land is occupied, it is compulsory for every person in that land to fight for liberation. So when I say revolution, I'm not talking about liberation struggles here. I'm talking about when you are in a Muslim land, a Muslim majority land, and you have a Muslim government. To rise up against that government, that's what we call revolution. Yeah, we're not talking about being occupied by foreign entities or being invaded by foreigners and then fighting back. Islam requires that every citizen, man and woman, fight back against the occupier. So I'm not talking about occupation whatsoever here. I don't want you to misunderstand. This is talking about entirely the population against their own government. Revolution. Okay. So here let's look at a few examples. Just a quick run through. So the Ottoman Empire or Ottoman Turkey. In 1908, we have the Young Turk Revolution. Young people with ambitions and dreams of what they can do with society, which triggers several revolutions after that. So in 1908, we have a revolution, then we have a counter-revolution in 1909. We have another counter-revolution in 1912, and then we have the revolution at a broader stage, the Balkanization or the Balkan War, the first Balkan War. The second Balkan War happens, and amongst the Balkan nations, they have an internal rift. So when you start one revolution, you basically kick off another revolution. So within short succession, you have various other revolutions that come out of this one here. Another revolution, a counter revolution in 1913. And this is where the Committee of Unity and Progress, Union and Progress, come back into power. So from 1908, they trigger a revolution. And by 1913, there are 5 revolutions. 5 revolutions. Yeah. Then you have World War I, which was effectively the turning point for the Ottoman Empire. And the reason why they had joined this war on the side of Germany is because the Young Turks were in power and they took control of the governments without letting even Sultan know. Mehmed Rashid V didn't know until the night before, when they announced in November that they're going to join World War I. And Shaykh al-Islam Mustafa Hayri Effendi, the famous image of him issuing the fatwa. So they got themselves into a major problem by 1914 by joining the war. It is said that Sultan Abdul Hamid II, when he found out that they had joined the war, said they should have joined on the side of the British. Why? Does anyone know why?
Because they never lose. Team.
Yes, so he said because the British never lose. So in other words, he had experience. They had youth and ambition, but he had experience. He knew exactly who they were dealing with. And he said if it had been something that I would have picked the British. They never lose. And he was perfectly right. As a result of that...
Isn't there an argument that it was impossible? It was never on the cards for them to be able to join the British? I think I've heard that argumentation somewhere. I don't know how factual it was.
They could have remained neutral. They didn't have to join a side. They could have remained neutral. Iran was neutral. They didn't have to join a side. Yeah. So at the very least, they could have just stayed out of it and let the European nations fight amongst themselves. And maybe then they would have stood a better chance, actually, because if Britain is weak, if Germany is weak, if the other nations are weak, you stand a better chance, right? But they got involved.
Europe and everything like that. So they knew they were so they could just push them around, essentially.
No, they got involved because they took money. They took free money. They could have just kept out of it, but they got involved. Man. So that was a trickle-down effect of a revolution in 1908. Then we have another revolution, the Turkish War of Independence. Then you have so that was when Mustafa Kemal Atatürk decided to take control of the entire thing, which results in the Republic of Turkey. Then we have later on in the 60s a military coup, the first of 3 coups to happen In 63, the second one comes through, and in 80, the third one comes through. So it's revolution after revolution, effectively. Then we move on to Syria. So this is 1949, where the prime minister is removed. 𝗃𝙗𝗡𝗨𝗥𝗦𝗘𝙦 is removed. First revolution. In the same month, in the same year, from March to August, a second revolution, a counter coup. Because again, when you open the door to a coup or revolution, you are signaling to all the other competitors, right, it's open for competition. If you can't close that door, others will come through. That's why you find one revolution kicks off the rest. So in August, another counter coup. And then in December, in the same year, a reverse counter coup. Right? In 63, another coup by the Ba'athist party. And this is where Assad comes into power now. In 66, a coup against the Assad party. And in 70, a corrective revolution. In other words, the coup that went wrong, we're going to do a counter coup to correct that. And Hafez al-Assad consolidates power. So ever since then, we know what happened in Syria. It began in 49. Then we move on to Iraq. In 1916, the Great Arab Revolt. That's triggered in the Hejaz in June 1916. That results in the Hashemites going to Jordan, going to Iraq. So that really began in 16 when they went against the Ottomans. In 1921, Faisal ibn Hussein becomes the first king of Iraq. In 1940, before that was 1920 actually, the Great Iraqi Revolt. That leads up to the second revolution, which is the coronation of Faisal. There's a new establishment. In 1940, there's another coup in Iraq, Golden Square. This is where the Germans support the Iraqis against Faisal, who was a British stooge, basically. In 58, July 14th Revolution. This is where the free officers of Iraq, they had copied the free officers in Egypt. So they had their own branch in Iraq. And they got rid of 𝗃𝙁𝗓𝗏 Qasim. In 1959, you have the Mosul Uprising. This is where the nationalists actually wanted to go against the free officers. In 61, the Kurds also got up in rebellion. Everyone's having a go, basically. It's just a cycle of revolutions. In 63, the Ramadan Revolution is where the Ba'athi party, the Ba'ath, got into power. The CIA backed them. So Saddam was a part of that coup. In 63, the same year, you have another coup. So you have those who followed Jamal Abdel Nasser, who went against the Ba'athi party in Iraq. It was just within their own movements. They had different factions. So they launched another coup in November. In 68, you have another revolution, July 17th Revolution. This is where the Ba'ath come back into power after being removed by the Nasserites. They come back into power in 68. Ahmed Hassan al-Bakr becomes the prime minister or the president. And his cousin, Saddam Hussein, becomes the chairman or vice president the following year. In 79, finally, Saddam becomes the president. His cousin steps down, and he decides to close the door. He does so by doing the purge. So to understand why that was important, you need to understand what came before it. That was a way of Saddam saying, no more. Okay, it ends here. So if there's anyone who's still harboring revolutionary ideas, I'm going to purge everything and everyone, and it ends here. So he locked the door tightly in 79. In 96, way later, there was another coup attempt against Saddam, okay, but that did not work. What follows that, we know the Americans come in, and we know what happens after that, right? So it doesn't spell good things when you start revolutions and coups. It doesn't result in good things in the long term. You create instability in the society, facade, and you create a lot of further bloodshed and oppression in the society. Yeah? You can see the patterns here. See the patterns here. Sometimes within the same year, you have 2 or 3 coups. Yeah? It's absolutely ridiculous within the same year. If I were to put the Sudanese case here, we would run out of space. Sudan has the longest list of coups and counter coups. Yeah, we would run out of space. It's a lesson for us to learn, basically. Now, if you're going to get involved in coups or revolutions, or to undermine an existing government, in the Sunni school of thought, at least in the classical Orthodox school of thought, there is a principle known as at-taghallub. At-taghallub. One of Allah's 99 names is al-ghalib. Al-ghalib. So from that we have at-taghallub. At-taghallub effectively is, let's explain it in the way that Sheikh Muhammad ibn Salih al-Uthaymin rahimahullah, hafidhahullah, rahimahullah, has described it in his book. So he says, when a man becomes a khalifa by prevailing over the people by the sword, in other words, there's no shura, there's no consultation, there's no vote, there's no election. He forces his way in by the gun or by the sword, and he establishes his authority and takes full control. So if you remember when I was discussing the issue of revolutions and control and the end justify the means in the shadow history session, I said the only condition is that he has control and he maintains it. That's the only condition here. Okay? Not that he's righteous, not that he came through the right way. He has to have control and he has to maintain control. If you have these two conditions, we give you bay'ah. This is according to the Sunni school of thought. Okay? I've said it many times during the programs, Umayyad and shadow history. Many of us, unbeknowingly, we have a Shi'i or Khariji political stance when we look at the Muslim world and their rulers today. Not to call you Shi'i or Khariji, but politically speaking, the ideals and principles that we espouse, unknowingly, these are what the Shi'i school and the Khariji school maintain. And that is, we do not accept rulers unless they are righteous and virtuous, and unless they come to power through legitimate means. In other words, by deserving the position, by taking shura. These do not apply in the Sunni school. It is admired, it is aspirational. We want that to happen, but if it doesn't happen, we will not reject a ruler. Okay? So Sheikh al-Uthaymin, he says, when a man becomes a khalifa by prevailing over the people by the sword, in other words, they didn't want him to be a leader, but he forced them by the sword, by killing people, by causing mayhem, but he establishes his authority and takes full control, then it becomes obligatory, wajib, to obey him, and he becomes the leader of the Muslims, subhanallah. This is how the likes of Hajjaj came into power, for example, how Abd al-Malik came into power, for example. This is why we do not make takfir of Banu Umayyah, because although they came to power under dubious means, they maintained power and had full control, and therefore we have to obey them and give bay'ah. Examples of that include some of the Umayyad and the Abbasid Khulafa and those after them. Yeah. And those after them. This includes all the other empires that come after them. The majority of them came through basically forcing their way in. This method is contrary to Sharia. So he makes it very clear. This is not the ideal. This is not what Islam teaches. This is not the Sunnah of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. This is not what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala enjoins. However, because it is seized by force, it is the way it is. Okay, so we have to accept the reality of that kind of political decision. So he makes it very clear, this is not Sharia, this is not Islam, but this is pragmatism. Because we have learned through history, and this is why history is so important. O Muslimin, you learn history as it is, not how you think it should be. Because the scholars, the jurists, consider historical precedents when they make rulings and give fatwa. They look at what happened in history as it happened, and they rule based on the reality of history, not the ideals, how things should be. So because they know that many, if not the majority of those dynasties and rulers who came to power later on, came through the sword, and you can't nullify all of them, otherwise you have no history left, we have to accept that if they come to power that way, we accept their authority, even though technically it goes against Sharia. This is politics, real politics 101. So he goes, but because great interests are served by having a ruler who rules the ummah, and because a great deal of mischief may result from chaos and loss of security in the land, The one who seizes authority by means of the sword should be obeyed. If he seizes power by force, but he rules in accordance with the laws of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this rule according to the law of Allah, it doesn't mean he becomes a Sahabi. It means you can pray. The outward signs of Islam are available. People make Hajj, they can pay zakah. Those basic pillars are established. We will accept him regardless. Yeah, we accept him regardless. Let's take a bit of a break here. What's your feedback? What do you feel about this? Have you heard about this principle before? What's your honest feedback? Yeah, tell me, what do you feel about this?
I feel like the guy who's coming into power, he's essentially doing khuruj. So it seems like there's kind of an overlap with the Khariji stance, you could say almost. It's like as long as let's call him a Khariji, for example. If the Khariji becomes successful, then he's accepted. Basically, like the greatest Khariji wins, basically.
100%. 100%. When we say Khariji, and people say Khariji, they're not objecting to be a Khariji. What they're objecting is a failed Khariji. The problem is not that you made khuruj, is that you were not successful. So for example, you'll hear, why is it that certain countries, certain nations, certain kingdoms became kingdoms and are now obeyed because of their khuruj against the Ottoman Empire? They did it to the Ottomans. Now they're kings and they don't want us to do the same thing to them. Is that not duplicitous, double standards? The answer is no. If they had failed in their rebellion, then they'll be blameworthy. But because they succeeded and they maintained power, they are now legitimate. Yeah? If another party should raise up against them and succeed in overthrowing them, they become legitimate. That's how it goes. It's the language of power. Yeah, it's not idealistic. It's not even Sharia compliant, but it is the way that the juristic system has had to evolve. Because, as I said before, the vast majority of those who come as rulers and dynasties came through the sword. They had to force their way in. Yeah? So long as they don't fail in the process and they become powerful and maintain power, they then become legitimate. So the ends in that case justifies the means. Yeah, these are very difficult conversations to have in the public.
Revolted though against the people that were in power. So when they're revolting before they're officially successful, is the act of them revolting is that haram basically? Or would it become halal if they win basically?
Yes, the ends justify the means. If they fail, let me give you an example. Which crime is not a crime, or which crime is not punishable if you succeed? This is illegal in the secular law. There is a crime in secular law. If you succeed in the crime, you won't be punished. It's only when you fail in that crime that you get punished. There is a crime that if you succeed in it, even though you succeeded, we all know you did it, you will not be punished. But if you fail, it's when you get punished for it, or you get the consequences. Suicide. Yeah. If you succeed in suicide, as far as the dunya is concerned, you can't be held accountable in the courts of law because you're already gone. But if you succeed, the consequence will be felt. Yeah, because you have to live with the consequence of failing the suicide, either brain damage or whatever else happens. Right. So likewise, with khuruj, if the group who is contesting the leadership of the government succeeds and takes power, they can't be held accountable anymore. They are the authority now. But if they fail in the process and they are apprehended, then they are taken to account for it. Yeah.
I have mixed feelings about this particular principle. For example, let's say if we have a society, let's now for a hypothetical situation, a Turkey-like society where you have people practicing at different levels Islam. Now, if a system comes over and they try to implement a very strict version of Islam, like let's say this is how the women should wear their clothes, no education for women, or this is how particular rules have to be followed for men and women. So the people that are already accustomed to certain rights or privileges that they have. Now it's overtaken. How then they would submit to such a government or a ruler?
You're describing a current government in the Muslim world. Yeah. If they have the government, they have the government. Yeah, and the people have to submit. This is according to Islamic, again, let me make it very clear. Sunni, classical Sunni or Orthodox Sunni jurisprudence.
But I think people, regardless, would still revolt, because once you are accustomed to certain privileges, when they are taken away, it's very difficult.
That is true. I agree. But then they'll be considered Khariji. In their revolt, until they are successful, they're considered Khariji. Which is why if you want to revolt, make sure you're gonna win. Don't do a half job. Make sure you can finish the job. If you can't finish a job, you're in trouble.
And the other, so here, like it said that once someone acquires rule by force, so that should be a Sunni person, or it says even a non-Sunni person, as long as it's...
So that's a discussion that's a bit more elevated. There are some discussions as to whether the person is not really Sunni or not even Muslim, but they're ruled by Islam somehow. Can they be obeyed? These are the kind of questions that Ibn Taymiyyah answers, rahimahullah, in general terms. Or there are examples, for example, when the Italians came into Libya, that some of the local shuyukh, they commanded their followers to submit to the Italians, because going against them, it was a greater harm than resisting them. So the fatwa then was, it's better that you submit to the Italians than to try to revolt against them, because the result will be greater if you try to fight these people. Okay, so it gets very difficult at that point. It gets very difficult. But essentially, it's might makes right. It comes down to that level. Might makes right. Yeah. So this is entrenched in the Sunni jurisprudence when it comes to this. Why, again, the issue of rebellion, government, the de facto position is to be patient with these people. You don't open that can of worms. Be patient with your government. Pray for the leaders. Don't go out talking against the leaders, because if you open that can of worms and you can't follow through with actions, you are opening the doors to hell. Yeah.
One thing that I found very interesting in Imam Sayyuti Tarikh al-Khulafa is how he treats Abdul Malik ibn Marwan. That before Abdullah ibn Zubair, when he is Caliph, Abdul Malik is treated as a rebel.
Yes.
But after Abdullah ibn Zubair died, then he is a Caliph, a Khalifa, and Imam Sayyuti treats him like an Khalifa.
Yes, a very good example. Barakallahu fikum. A very good example, because when Abdul Malik was, if Abdul Malik had not succeeded in eliminating Abdullah ibn Zubair, Abdul Malik was the one who would be considered a Khariji. Textbook example, 100% Khariji. 100% Khariji. But because he was able to complete the mission, he's recognized as a Khalifa. And his sons also recognized as Khulafa. But had he fallen short of that mission, he would go down in the books of history as a Khariji. See, that's just the way it is, unfortunately.
And just my thoughts, like when you first explained to us this kind of position, so my thoughts were like, it makes the bar like high, like the bar very high now. So if you were to like commit to a revolution, like you need to be super organized, planned, methodical, and everything like that. So the positives is that is like, it's obviously going to make it a lot more rare, but when it does occur, like they understand the consequences. It's like high risk. So in a way, I see it as like positive in that sense, as opposed to the other extreme where it's just like, I don't know, it's just like your personal emotions, or I don't know, how something happens in your life and you just want to vent, and then you just want to like get some recognition, and then you're just stirring up a coup, maybe get paid off, and then you try to start it, and then if you fail, it's like minor consequences, but you've destroyed and like a whole generation of people and a country. So in that sense, I really see the kind of benefit in that and the wisdom by taking this stance.
It's difficult for average people because, and I say average, including myself, the populace, because we look at things from a more, how do you say, not an abstract, from a more concrete perspective. Absolutist. Justice is justice, right? Righteousness is righteousness. Falsehood is falsehood. So we expect the same standard across, and we should. But politics doesn't work that way, unfortunately. Neither does power. Power only respects power. So the ulama, to their credit, they have to straddle between these two potential perspectives. What the public expects and what they know is a reality of politics and power. Which is why they will default to telling the public, be patient, be patient, be patient, be patient. Because you don't know what you're asking for, actually. I know you want a change in revolution, a change in administration, but unless you're willing to and able to actually win and secure victory, don't start something you can't finish. And this is why you find people saying the ulama are scholars for dollars. They are all scared to speak the truth. No, they're afraid for your safety. If you came to them with an army and said, we have an army and we are ready, we have a system, we have a replacement, we have everything ready, we're just willing to go. Some scholars may actually agree with you. Let's go for it. But if you just come with complaints, the ruler is not being just, he's doing this, he's doing that, they'll tell you, be quiet, just be patient, because you don't have what it takes to complete the mission. So it's better that you don't start the mission to begin with.
And wouldn't that just naturally make it like elevate your standards, and for you to become like build these systems in place and that self-sufficiency, rather than you just being influenced by outside forces?
Absolutely.
And then so
I agree. No, I agree. It's high stakes, high reward. Right? If the person who wants to mount a revolution understands that, and they know the rules of the game, these are the rules, then they'll be more prepared. And they'll have to consider a lot more than just, I'm not happy with the ruler. They'll be really prepared, because I know I'll have to die. I may lose everything I love. And if I lose, I'm going out as a khariji. Imagine dying upon that, right? Yeah, there we are. Yeah. So it's not as romantic as the ruler is bad, therefore let's just do a petition, let's go online and speak bad about the ruler. No, it's a high risk, high stake endeavor. You can't afford to miss. It's like in the underworld, I'll give you a few insights. I'm not sure how many of you watch gangster movies. But if somebody wants to rob you, they have a mask on. Have you heard this before? Mask on, mask off, right? When somebody says mask off, what do they mean by that in the underworld? Somebody says mask off. What they mean is, if I'm coming to rob you, I don't intend to kill you. I'll wear a mask so that you won't know that I robbed you. But if I intend to kill you, I'm not going to wear a mask. Why not?
You want them to know and everyone to talk about it if they find out?
No. If somebody comes to kill someone, it's only the two of them, comes to rob that person, you wear a mask. But if you want to kill that person and you intend to kill them, finish the job, you don't have to wear a mask. It doesn't make sense. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. So when you go for revolution, mask off. But the problem is, if you shoot and miss and you took your mask off, now you know you have big problems. You can't miss. You can't afford to miss. You can't afford to miss. That's a revolution there. So at-taghallub is a principle that effectively it means to overwhelm, to overpower, to muscle your way in. If you muscle your way in, you gain power, you maintain power. All the scholars have to be behind your back now. They're behind you now. They'll endorse you now, and they'll tell the population to give you bay'ah. That's how it works. It's for the greater good. It's pragmatism. Now, these rules were not developed by the Prophet ﷺ in terms of he didn't instruct us to do this, but it's by necessity. بالضرورة. By necessity, the scholars later on have had to codify these rules. Yeah, they had to codify it, that if we stick by the principle of the righteous ruler, look at all the dynasties that we have to scratch out of history. Right? So this is the way it works. It's not ideal, but it's reality. Yeah, this is a reality of politics. He goes on to mention again, he continues to mention, if a man rebels and seizes power, so the man begins as a rebel, as a khariji. If a man is a khariji, he makes khuruj, and he seizes power, the people must obey him. So imagine in 1979, 𝗾𝙗𝙗𝙗𝙗 and his group, by a stretch of the imagination, somehow managed to seize power in Saudi Arabia. It would be mandatory for the people of Saudi Arabia to pledge allegiance to him. He would become their lawful ruler. Had he succeeded, he would have become their lawful ruler, and they would have to pledge allegiance to him. So the Sheikh says, if a man rebels or makes khuruj and seizes power, the people must obey him, even if he seizes power by force and without their consent, because he has seized power. In other words, the ends justifies the means. The reason for that is that if his rule is contested, it will lead to a great deal of evil. And this is what happened during the Umayyad period. So the entire Umayyad, we've just summarized it now. This is why the Umayyad kingdom is not condemned by scholars, especially the Sunni scholars, as kafir or irrelevant, because they seize power and they maintain power. Right? So the obedience to them becomes incumbent upon the Muslims at that time. So this is what he mentions Al-Umayyad, Banu Umayyah, when some of them seized power by means of force and gained the title of Khalifa, and people obeyed them in obedience to the command of Allah, subhanallah. Yeah. So in the Hanafi school, some people may think, well, this is all Salafiyah, this is a Wahhabiyah, so this is what they believe. We don't believe in that. Well, in the Hanafi school, there are many other examples. I picked a simple one here. I didn't want to make this another theological or jurisprudence-based topic, but I brought a few evidences. So this is from the Salafi school. Although it goes back to classical authoritative text, this is one from the Hanafi madhab. And the Hanafi madhab goes on even farther. It goes even farther in terms of what the Khalif can get away with. I'm not going to mention it here, but they go even farther, to an extreme, in fact. But in summary, Abu Hanifa held that if the supreme Muslim ruler commits a crime entailing the application of had, so in other words, murder, rape, zina, theft, that should be applied by the supreme authority of the Muslim state, and there is no high authority to apply the had against him, the had is waived. This is quite a technical way of going about it, but effectively what they're saying is, in the school of Abu Hanifa, the highest authority is the Khalifa. He's the only one who's allowed to enjoin the punishment of death. So if somebody commits zina, somebody commits armed robbery, he's the only person in society allowed to either assign somebody else to carry it out or to himself pronounce that this person should be killed. So if he commits the crime, that's worthy of had, because there's nobody else in the land more authoritative than he is not subject to being punished. Have you understood that? Because he's a chief commander, and he's the only one who's allowed to say this person should die for this crime. If he commits the same crime, there's nobody else in the land who has more authority than him, therefore, and he can't punish himself, because if he punishes himself, there will be no more ruler in the land, so he can't punish himself. Therefore, he is exempt. He is exempt. Yeah? Okay. It goes, except if it's a case of qisas, so if, for example, retaliation. He owes somebody something personally, he has to give them their rights back. But other than that, he is exempt from the punishment. That is because the Muslim ruler has a sole authority to implement hudud, and he's a perpetrator and if he is a perpetrator at the same time, he cannot apply the had against himself. It's like saying somebody is a chief justice, the highest ranking judge in court in the land, and he commits a crime, he can't judge himself, he can't sentence himself. Yeah? He's the highest ranking judge in the entire country, and he commits a crime. He cannot sentence himself. Therefore, in this case, he doesn't have to be judged, or he is not subject to justice. This is political speech here. This is where the politics of it all becomes very different to what we expect at the lower level. When you get to the higher level, it looks very different. Yeah? The reason why I'm mentioning these things is because to make sense of what I've said to you just now about the Umayyads, the Abbasids, what they've done, it's not Islamic, but why did it happen regardless? This is how the scholars of our tradition in classical times up until recent times have found a way to reconcile between what they did and what should be the case Islamically. They had to reconcile. They had to make rukhsa is concessions. That's how it comes about. So again, we want to study history the way history was written and understand how the reality of the history actually comes to us. Not to pretend that these things never happened and they can never happen again. We want to understand the real history from the real sources and how did scholars deal with this problem. It's not easy, as you can see. It's not easy at all. Yeah. Allah will judge, ultimately speaking. But at the very end, when you read all of this and you study all of this and your head begins to hurt and you think, how could this be possible? The ulama make one thing very clear to you. If you are lost for words and you don't know what to say about the ruler, what to do about the ruler, resort to the following advice. Al-Dhahabi reports, Fudail ibn Iyad, rahimahullah, has said, and this has also been reported of Imam al-Shafi'i, the same statement. If I had one dua that I could make and I would be sure would be answered, I would make dua for the ruler. If the ruler is righteous, it will lead to righteousness for the country. And if the ruler is fasid, then the entire society suffers as well. Yeah. Then we have the same, something similar. Imam Ahmed says the same thing. Imam Ahmed says, indeed, I pray for his soul. Somebody came to Imam Ahmed and they mentioned Al-Mutawakkil. Okay? These are the people who were persecuting him. Radiallahu anhu. They were persecuting him under the mihna. So somebody mentioned this Khalifa, and Imam Ahmed, rather than cursing him, says, indeed, I pray for his righteousness and well-being. Yeah. We look at our creed again from the Sunni school. Imam al-Tahawi. It's a very, very famous book on the creed of the Sunni Muslim. And one of the points of belief, not political alliance, belief, iman, aqidah, one of them is we do not accept any rebellion against our leaders or the administrators of our public affairs, even if they are oppressive. We also do not pray for evil to befall any of them or withdraw our allegiance from them. And then he goes on to say, another point, Hajj and Jihad are perpetual obligations that are carried under the legitimate Muslim ruler. Legitimate meaning he has power. Not that he came to power in legitimate means, but that he came to power however he did so, but he has power. Irrespective of their personal probity. Probity means basically piety. Until the end of times. In other words, this rule will never change. Nothing can nullify or rescind them. Yeah, so in the school of thought of the Sunni orthodoxy, we don't really care how righteous the ruler is, whether he drinks alcohol or not. Yeah. What matters is he's in power, he has control of the situation, there's no competing factor, and he's not committing shirk or some kind of clear-cut kufr. If he's fulfilling that, everything else he does, we have to obey and just pray that he does the right thing at some point. We pray for him. And these are points of aqidah in the Sunni school of thought. Yeah. I mean, it gets very heavy, but there are many books you can read into, you can study if you want to understand how government works and why this issue of the Umayyads, for example, is so difficult to unpack. Okay. So you have, for example, Nizam al-Mulk. He wrote a book, Siyasatnama, the book of governance or the book of politics. Okay. The rules for kings. There's a more recent version of this, but this is quite an old version. Then you have Ahkam al-Sultaniyya, al-Mawardi, the most famous book, I would say, actually, on the issues of governance, leadership, and how the ruler can rule, the conditions of rulership. Very, very famous. And then you have the principles of state and governments. This is Muhammad Asad. It's a more contemporary work, a lighter work. Yeah? And then, of course, Ibn Khaldun's Muqaddimah. Yeah? There's a reason why most of these scholars and historians are typically very, very straightforward about rulership and who gets to rule and whether it's right or wrong to rebel against them, because they understand the rules of leadership and power. And you can bridge the gap by reading their books, inshallah, if you have further questions. So with that, we end the Umayyad Kingdom. Thank you very much for your patience. It's been a very, very long year. We've gone through so much in this course of studies. I'm sure there'll be questions, there'll be even concerns. We can continue discussing these in the group, inshallah. But keep in mind, it's not about idealism. It's about the reality of power and politics. And if you find our scholars in the modern age telling us to be patient or to abstain from being quick to criticize governments and rulers, it's because it's very complicated. It's not an easy situation. It's not about piety of the ruler. It's about the society at large, the stability of that society, and whether or not there is a viable alternative. If there is no viable alternative, you'll have to be patient. But if you intend to die, to make sure that you succeed and you have everything in place, a system in place, and a replacement in place, a government in place or replacement government in place, an army to support you, and you are sure that you could win this fight, they can support you. But if it's just petitions, YouTube videos, Twitter posts, be patient.